So let's take a look at what's doing work for the Space Elves on the tabletop. Now their shiny new Codex has hit tournaments. It seems that a huge amount of units and detachments are having some good success, including a few small tournament wins. Let's see what good players are using and why. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Aeldari. In this video I thought it could be good to take a focused look at what people are managing to make work with the new Codex, as the Space Elves seem to have had a rather good showing on their first tournament weekend, with a massive amount of placings towards the top of events. I think most people were expecting Codex Aeldari to be really quite strong based on the rules and points, and so far that certainly seems to be ringing true. I had a look at every single well-placing Aeldari army that I could find over the events of the past weekend, and it seemed that the majority of big events had at least one Aeldari player go 4-on-1. And the Crash Worlds also took home a few small tournament victories, a couple of smaller 5-round ones, and a fairly big RTT. I was really interested to see exactly what sort of units and detachments people would be using when they had the stress test of having to take good stuff to a tournament. It did feel that in the Aeldari Codex, a whole bunch of different things and options would be viable, particularly having a lot of strength from their core mechanic with their massive movement shenanigans, and it certainly looked like lots of different detachments will be possible to win with. For this video I thought we'd take a look over 8 strong army lists that have done well, and it seems that so far the detachments that have done well are the Warhost, Aspect Host, the Ynnead, Windrider Host and Seer Council, with the most high placings being for the Aspect Host so far it would seem. In the army list, as people were expecting, there seems to be a heavy focus on certain Aspect Warriors, loads of Fire Dragons, Striking Scorpions, Warp Spiders, Banshees and Dark Reapers, plenty of those being led by their Phoenix Lords for the better ones. Though it looks like certain other things that were maybe hyped up a bit haven't really materialised, at least in these 8 army lists. It doesn't look like anyone's using the Guardian Death Star type thing, at least not with maxed out Warlocks and a support weapon platform. Maybe people will make some good use of it in future army lists, though I must admit I was kind of remaining to be convinced on that one just because of the sheer amount of points that it costs when maxed out, even if it does give you a very scary unit. Otherwise it looks like for support shooting there aren't many people using War Walkers. It seems that Shroud Runners are the preferred over there to strip cover as opposed to get extra AP. And despite a whole bunch of hype around Wraith Lords as well, out of the top performing list of the first weekend it only looks like one person has used one of those, and most successful army lists seem to have been leaving them at home. It did feel like maybe their rerolls have perhaps been a bit side graded, losing the very good inbuilt Battle Host rerolls for their inbuilt rerolls of 1 that they get now perhaps. Maybe people will have a bit of luck with a Spirit Conclave list or 2 in coming weeks though. In any case though, let's jump into it and talk through the lists. First up we have a Warhost one, and this one's the sort of balanced Aeldari movement shenanigan type one, amping up battle focus, giving you 1 additional token to use every battle round, and it gives you +1 inches to your movement, whether it's the random D6 ones or the +2 inch movement becoming +3. Not crazily powerful with the core rule, but definitely is a nice quality of life thing to have, and all that extra movement will add up a bit. Beyond that they've got stratagems for Fire and Fade being a particularly good one, and re-embarking in transport vehicles, very easy for jumping out of terrain, shooting things and then staying hidden. There's a good return to reserves one for infantry near board edges, a sustained hits damage one for infantry within 12 inches, fallback shoot and charge and a -1 to hit. For one example of a Warhost list that did well, this list by Christopher Wright podiumed at the Dawnbringer GT, going 4 wins to 1 loss at a 38 player event, and this one's most certainly got the Aspect Warriors out in force. This one's got a bunch of common features with a bunch of the Aspect Host lists, a big core block of damage dealer Dark Reapers, 1 unit of 10 of them and 1 unit of 5. I'd guess that the big unit of 10 might go with the Autarch with the Reaper launcher perhaps, maybe allowing them to do a bit of firing and fading or re-embarking on transports for free perhaps. Very powerful to have that amount of strength 10, damage 3 firepower, hit the enemy and then hide again. There's then Asurmen with a big unit of 10 Dire Avengers. I guess they'd be getting to the fight with a Wave Serpent. Asurmen just has absolutely brutal damage output against the right target, potentially being able to account for an entire squad of Terminators by himself, and the Dire Avengers are pretty great at streaming out lighter infantry. Asurmen can also shoot moves to another squad that can hit the enemy and then hide. There's Eldrad Ulthran here who can keep the command points flowing. He looks like he's just with a small squad of 2 Warlocks, I guess just so he doesn't get insta-killed right away by some indirect or something. And if it makes sense, he could also potentially move out to doom an enemy unit for +1 to wound. And then in the HQ section we've also got Fugan. I guess he'd be joining one of the 2 squads of 5 Fire Dragons to give them the increased range. Fire Dragons in themselves are just ludicrously threatening melter troops that can run up the board really far, particularly in the Warhost with the boosted battle focus movement, and then have some of the game's most efficient anti-tank if they get there, and more so within melter range. Then for the other Aspect Warriors, there's 2 units of 5 Howling Banshees. Again, this amount and this number seems to be a bit of a staple. Massive charge threats to jump on enemy elite infantry and tear them down, the Exarch taking an Executioner. 2 units of striking Scorpions, which again seems to be a sweet spot that a bunch of other lists have, infiltrating into the midboard, and then a scary amount of damage with their Scorpion Chainswords, the Exarchs here taking Chain Sabers. 1 unit of Rangers, I guess also to help out with an expendable infiltrating unit. There's a unit of Shroud Runner jet bikes that have some okay anti-infantry stats, but can also strip cover from a unit, which quite a lot of the different Aeldari shooting here would enjoy. And then there's 2 individual units of Warp Spiders, which again seem to be a massively common include, just for the big 24-inch jump threat range that they can do, and they can still mess up some lighter infantry when they get there. The Exarch here goes shooty with Death Weavers and the Spinneret rifle, and if it makes sense towards the end of the game they could be used for secondary objectives to basically auto-complete ones within range, if that was more necessary than their damage output. Overall a whole bunch of scary threats here, and it seems that mostly Footdar with a couple of Wave Serpents does seem to be a staple for the Aeldari. Focusing on a couple of datasheets, and not too surprising a few people have gone for Asurmen. He can move, shoot, move his Dire Avengers, and has some fairly nasty boosted Shuriken Catapults and some alright melee if he needs to. The biggest thing I think about him is that Hand of Azayan rule, once per game making the Bloody Twins damage 3, anti-infantry 3+, and devastating wounds. So basically by himself he is really quite likely to be taking out an entire squad worth of elite infantry in a single round of shooting, and if there's the appropriate targets for him to take down at 24-inch range, then that damage output is absolutely nuts. Fire Dragons also seem to be in just about every list as well. No real surprise there at all. I did make an entire dedicated video to them, but I think they do have some claim to be perhaps some of the best dedicated anti-tank in Warhammer 40k. It is their thing after all. But between reroll all hits, wounds and damage results against monsters and vehicles with 5 melter weapons, when say Space Marine Eradicators get 4 shots and hitting less accurately for the same cost, the numbers are just kind of ridiculously spectacular. Never mind the Exarch taking either a Dragon Fusion Gun or Fire Pike, and the Aspect Shrine token for an automatic 6 to wound at one point, and while they might be much easier to kill than Eradicators, they can move way faster. 7-inch base, then advance and shoot, and also throw in battle focus if it's needed. Unless you've got loads of screening, you need to be a very long way back to escape the wrath of these guys. Next up though, we're not leaving Aspect Warriors behind, as let's talk about a few Aspect Host lists. It looks like there were a trio of these placing highly, and this one's the detachment that's themed around the Aspect Warriors and the Avatar of Cain. Their core rule is the Path of the Warrior, either re-rolling all hits or wounds of 1 for Avatar or Aspect Warrior units. You pick the more appropriate one whenever you shoot or fight. Beyond that, perhaps one of their biggest ones is their massive shooting combo. They can gain either sustained lethal hits or ignores cover, and boost that to 2 of those buffs if they expend their aspect token, which will often make sense to. They also have a re-embark and a transport in the fight phase, so are great with Wave Serpents, and have a Fights on Death on a 4+, an Ignores Modifies 1, and a Desperate Escapes Fallbacks 1. A few people also seem to be taking the Mantle of Wisdom enhancement to double dip on the re-rolls for the Aspect Host. For the first one of these lists that placed highly, this one's by Gaia Dutter, who used it to take 5th at the Okeanos Rising GT with 4 wins to 1 loss. There's definitely a fair few Aspect Warrior similarities that are being gone heavy on here. This time there's 3 units of Warp Spiders, though for 2 of them they're taking Death Weavers and Power Blades, and one takes the full Power Blade array, which looks like it'd probably be the squad that's going with Lycus. That'll give you an absolutely murderous squad to jump in there, do a bit of shooting, and then hit very hard in melee. Certainly scary stuff when you can move 24 inches and still charge. There's 2 Striking Scorpions once more, these ones taking Biting Blades, 2 sets of Howling Banshees again with Executioners, one of them's joined by Jane Zar this time though, so that squad will be hitting extra hard. 2 units of Fire Dragons once again with Fire Pikes, one joined by Fugan, and then this list going slightly heavier on the Dark Reapers with 1 unit of 10 and 2 units of 5 of them. Again, there's an Autarch to lead 1 unit of the Aspect Warriors. He's taking Reaper Launcher, Starglaive and Mantle of Wisdom. I'd guess again that he'd probably go with the Dark Reapers for the big reroll ones to hit and wound. All very scary out of such a big hitting squad, and that could be a really nice unit to jump out of a Wave Serpent and then get back in. Finally, there's a unit of Storm Guardians that can provide their sticky objectives type rule, and then 1 Lonely Warlock Skyrunner, who could be a nice cheap expendable unit to run around doing secondaries and things I guess. Interesting to see some of the similarities and differences here with some different Phoenix Lords being used in this one. Striking Scorpions seem to be near enough in auto-include territory. Looks like people are slanting more towards them than more cheap and expendable Rangers. They did gain the Scout special rule in the Codex update, so that means that it's pretty godly positioning for them alongside Infiltrators, so you could have them move up and be more aggressive if you get first turn, or pull back to break line of sight if not. Their damage output's easily enough to bully most midfield infantry style threats, with a flurry of 16 chainsword attacks at AP -1 now with sustained hits. And then there seems to be at least some love for all the different Exarch options, Biting Blade, Scorpion's Claw and Chain Sabers. Overall seems pretty great value for 75 points. Before we move on to the other Aeldari armies, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in the Magnet Baron. They have a store based in the USA, supplies of magnets and components for 40k kits, making sure they have reliably good quality supplies of M52 magnets. They're based in the USA, though can ship worldwide, though international shipping might cost a fair bit extra. I certainly make good use of magnets myself in my hobby projects. Some staples like my magnetised Lehman Russes or Imperial Knights have been great to flex around and move with the times as 40k keeps on updating. As a result, they're some of the models that I've played with most over the years. The Magnets Baron supplies have a bunch of tailored kits that aims to help you magnetise up all sorts of different specific 40k items. This snazzy one is for their Questoris Knight with a whole bunch of 3D printed bits, though they do have a bunch more simple ones as well. Perhaps a relevant one for certain Aeldari units are flying stems on jet bikes and grav tanks though. That's another one I've certainly made use of magnets of in the past, to have them attached to the top of the stems so there's no danger of them snapping off. In any case though, thanks to them for sponsoring the video. I'll leave them linked down in the video description if you'd like to check them out, and cycle back briefly at the end of the video to talk through a bit more of their range. Moving on though, and for another successful example of Aspect Host, here we have Dan Morris's list, placing third at Red Dragon GT. Again, a bunch of similar themes compared with the ones that we've seen before. This one maybe most notably going super heavy on the Dark Reapers, 2 big units of 10 of them, which I'd guess the Autarchs might be leading. Again, not 100% sure as to unit attachments here, but they do seem like the sort of squads that you'd really like to have jumping baton transports or hitting maximally hard. Otherwise, we've got the 2 Howling Banshee units once again, one with Jane Zar, Asurmen leading a small unit of 5 Dire Avengers, being able to do some move shoot move shenanigans there. 3 small units of Fire Dragons, each with a Fire Pike, and these ones are going without Fugan. To be fair, they don't really need his extra damage output, though his Revive on Death can be pretty disruptive. There's a single unit of Shroud Runners to strip some cover, just the 1 unit of Striking Scorpions in this one, and 2 units of Warp Spiders this time. Dark Reapers do perhaps seem to be the most heavily emphasised Aspect Warrior since they got their profile update. 90 points per 5 of them, or 180 for 10. Their big Reaper launcher profile now hits at strength 10, AP 2 and damage 3, which was a seriously big upgrade compared with the previous. They ignore cover and ignore modifiers to their ballistic skill innately, and the Exarch can also chip in with a Tempest launcher, which gives you perhaps a surprisingly good amount of indirect fire, at least enough to worry lighter infantry squads out there, and particularly with the Aspect Host rerolls. All very scary when you can throw in sustained and lethal hits for a 1 command point stratagem as well, or have them re-embarking back into a Wave Serpent after they've dealt all their damage. Speaking of which, Wave Serpents certainly seem to be a staple in these Warhost and Aspect Host lists. 115 points for an armoured Aeldari hull, often with a big bright lance on the top, and now they're a bit more sturdy than they were before, with a -1 to wound against ranged attacks if the strength is higher than their toughness of 9. They seem particularly great for any Aspect Warrior that's worth paying the sort of re-embark stratagem for them, and potentially the transport itself could even be out of line of sight from the enemy while it's doing its shenanigans. Finally, for the Aspect Host lists, there was this army list by Dami Segan, who used it to take first at Brighton GT, going 5 wins undefeated at a 21-player grand tournament. Again, quite a lot of similar themes here, a whole bunch of Dark Reapers, 3 units and 1 big squad of 10, 3 squads of Fire Dragons, and one of them taking Fugan along for the ride. One of the Howling Banshee squads in this one has been expanded into a big unit of 10 of them. That could be a nice unit to deny Overwatch on, maybe with Battle Focus. 2 sets of Scorpions, 3 sets of Warp Spiders with their ranged loadout, and 2 Wave Serpents, these ones taking Scatter Lasers as opposed to the Bright Lancers. Otherwise they've got Lycus for the Phoenix Lord for the Warp Spiders, an on-foot Autarch, again I guess to lead the Dark Reaper big unit, and then interestingly enough a Wayleaper Autarch with Fusion Gun and Starglaive. I guess that could give one of the Warp Spider squads a bit more in the way of options. That list seems to have gone extra heavy on the Howling Banshees. And again, like a lot of the units, it looks like the general thinking is to take a small amount of them, but not loads, with these Aspect Warriors with their extra long strike range, with inbuilt advance and charge and 8-inch move, and then had a really quite enormous profile turnaround in the Codex. The regular Banshees having 2 attacks at strength 4, AP 2 and damage 2 with anti-infantry 3+, so really quite a good Space Marine killing profile. And then the Exarch will take the Executioner, 3 attacks at strength 6, AP 3 and damage 3 there, so a profile that's big enough to threaten Terminators and the like. Jane Zar does seem to be one of the more tempting Phoenix Lords as well, with her rather vast amount of strength 6 and damage 2 attacks, and she makes squads auto-advance 6 inches for yet more strike range. Autarchs definitely do seem to be part of the picture for the Eldar list as well. I was maybe a bit apprehensive as to how much they'd be included more than the Phoenix Lords, though it seems that between their own damage output, getting a nice version of a Reaper launcher plus a good Starglaive damage 3 profile and melee, they do enough to make the inclusion. I guess reducing stratagem cost by 1 command point is quite a big deal in the Aspect Host, when you might be making repeated use of stratagems like re-embarking or the big boosted damage one. Next up, there's a Seer Council army list. This is the one with the new version of Fate dice, casting the runes at the start of the game and then being able to plug them into free stratagems later on, generally kind of representing psychic powers of the Farseers, affecting Aeldari infantry within 12 inches of them. Perhaps one of the biggest and most impactful is teleporting a nearby infantry squad to somewhere else on the board, pretty great for an alpha strike, but they've also got options to stop enemies shooting at units greater than 18 inches away, a shooting boost with ignores cover, and AP boosts for critical wounds, a battle shock in the command phase that might be enough to stop the enemy scoring things, a psychic overwatch which is actually fairly punchy with an average of 4 mortal wounds dealt when an enemy moves within 9 inches of a psyker, and a -1 to hit and wound in the fight phase that might be enough to stop the enemy actually wiping out a unit, even if Aeldari tend to be quite fragile. They also have an enhancement called Lucid Eye that can manipulate those fate dice a bit to help guide them towards the actual stratagems that you want to be free, if there's some that you particularly want to target. For one example of an army list that did well with this one's by Tim Lowes, who went 4-1 with this one at a 62-player tournament called Darksphere GT. For the Psykers themselves, there's just a few of them guiding out those stratagems, it would seem. Eldrad Ulthuan in with a squad of 11 Guardian Defenders with a Bright Lance, and there's also a single Warlock on foot as well with a Singing Spear and that Lucid Eye enhancement. I guess he might attach to the same unit, and they'd probably all be kept somewhere nice and safe where they can push out those buffs to 12 inches. Otherwise, to help boost things, there's a couple of Warlock Skyrunners. They'd be able to hand out to some of the more outranging units in the army, potentially one of them joining that unit of 6 Windriders with Shuriken Cannons. Otherwise, for the units, there's Fugan with a big unit of 10 Fire Dragons. I wonder if the idea might be to teleport them for a massive Melter Alpha Strike. I guess that could mean that the Fire Pike and Fugan's gun would be instantly within Melter range there. There's a small unit of Dire Avengers with Eldrad Ulthuan. I wonder if they might be getting out of the Falcon Grav tank, which could allow them to reroll wounds, which could be absolutely monstrous with Asurmen's big go turn. To take the mid board, there's 2 cheap units of Rangers and 1 unit of Striking Scorpions. Interesting to see Baharoth here with a unit of Swooping Hawks. They'd be able to bound on and off the board, taking big pot shots at the enemy, and Baharoth can hit pretty hard himself on the Alpha Strike. There's just the 1 unit of Warp Spiders with Lycus and taking the Power Blade array, so a massive close combat charge out of Flicker Jump there. The big unit of Windriders with Shuriken Cannons that are really quite general purpose, and I guess they'd quite enjoy the Ignores cover. This one definitely has a bit of a different vibe to the previous Aspect Warrior type lists, still taking a bunch of the similar sort of powerful units, but interesting to see the buffs revolving around the Seers and having them on the board as well. Between the detachment rule and Eldrad Ulthuan, there'd be a crazy amount of stratagems going around in this one though. Eldrad's 110 points, and now he's the commander that allows you to generate a command point at the start of the command phase. Certainly not the worst to have with a unit of Guardian Defenders or Storm Guardians somewhere safe on a home field objective. And if and when it makes sense to, he can move out to doom an enemy unit for a +1 to wound. That could be very nice to coordinate with all manner of other Aeldari attacks. And I guess even if he wanted to teleport his own unit around late game, he could even make Shuriken Catapults hit fairly hard with that and the detachment buffs. Next up, we've also got an entry for the Windrider host as well. This one was perhaps one of the lesser talked about ones out of the Codex, though it certainly looked like it had some pretty powerful rules for the jet bike units. Their core rule is Riding the Wind, and it allows Windriders to basically be bouncing on and off the board at will. They can arrive from strategic reserves round 1 if they want to, and then a number of units can return to reserves if they're not in engagement range at the end of the enemy turn, 2 units at strike force. Their stratagems focus around the mounted units. There's a big and scary reroll wound rolls for a unit set up on the board this turn, and given that often Windriders will be triggering their own inbuilt reroll hits, that could be reroll hits and wounds with Shuriken Cannons, there's a 6-inch close deep strike one. So the jet bikes aren't just going to be limited by going around the edges of the table. There's a move 7 inches after slaying a unit, a bonus AP when shooting, very nice for Shuriken Cannons, fallback shoot and charge and advanced shoot and charge, and a 4+ invulnerable save against enemy shooting. They've also got a command point farming enhancement among others. This was Adrian Lopez's list, who used the Windrider host to take down a small 5-round tournament called Duke City Games. Only 17 players, though 5 victories, with a very cool looking and near entirely mounted jet bike list. There's a Farseer Skyrunner with the Echoes of Ulthuan, so he can rustle up some command points as he goes around. I guess he might be leading the big unit of 6 Windriders with Shuriken Cannons. They could be a good Alpha Strike units to use the 4 rerolls to hit and wound on if it made sense. And there's another 2 smaller units with Shuriken Cannons that could be a bit more interference style units or doing close deep strikes for secondaries and things. The big scary damage punch of this list though comes from 3 units of 6 Shining Spears, which are massive investment units at 240 points each, though their damage profiles are really scary and general purpose since they gain the anti-keywords. Shining Spears ignore vertical move distance now, so basically it means that they should be able to just have monstrously long charge threat ranges from behind terrain when they're on the board, even more so with advance and charge and battle focus if they need it. And with their damage output, anything they charge should really feel the pain, even if they're not going to be all that tough to take out in return if the enemy gets to strike them back. If they manage to hit something and then use that move after kill stratagem to be able to hide though, that could also be really big. Otherwise, there's a whole bunch of Harlequin Skyweaver jet bikes as well. These ones broadly can't use the main synergist of the detachment as that keys off the Asurmen keyword, but gives you yet more really fast Aeldari with hard-hitting melee with their Zephyr Glaives. They also take some haywire cannons to take down tough stuff. There's a unit of Shroud Runners that can strip some cover, one Warlock Skyrunner. Not sure if he's going independent or being fielded with the big Windrider squad. I guess his ignores cover and destructor wouldn't be terrible for that though. A bunch of Striking Scorpions for the midfield once more, along with a unit of Rangers, and then a couple of Shadow Weaver platforms, I guess, to hold the home field and screen out there. And they have a bit of nuisance indirect fire that can translate to a few mortal wounds when the enemy moves around after it hits them. Shining Spears certainly got some fun rules improvements in the new Codex. The ignore vertical distance when moving was a really big one just for being able to hop over ruins as if they weren't there. A bit of a return to form of say the 9th edition fly keyword, but otherwise their lances just got a lot better at taking down big stuff. 3 attacks per jet bike at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 3, but they now have the anti-monster and anti-vehicle keywords on a 3+, so if a unit of these charges in against something big and tough, there's a good chance they're going to kill it, and particularly so with the Exarch Star Lance as well. In general, it seems that they're not being taken by every list though, as their points did increase by a lot. They're up to 120 points or 240 first 6. So while you're getting a fast unit that's almost certainly going to get a big alpha strike on the enemy and do a lot of damage when it does, you're also paying loads for it, and they're not really too hard to take down unless they can find some way to hit the enemy while staying safe. Seems like they did well enough to have some very good success in this list though. Lastly, we've got a couple of examples from the Ynnead, another one of the detachments that certainly people were looking at with a bunch of interest, just given they're really quite interesting detachment rule and stratagems that can have some absolutely big swings happen, with a bunch of things that might not always trigger, but when they do they can matter really, really big. Their core rule is Strength from Death, giving the option to make a normal move at the end of the enemy shooting phase, which can set up a unit for a great alpha strike next turn, or potentially keep a unit safe from a charge that was just about to happen. They can use Fade Back to tag enemy units in the shooting phase if that made sense. A 1 damage Ynnead unit can fight first at the start of the fight phase, potentially combining with Lethal Surge as well, if the opponent made the mistake of killing some Ynnead out of a big unit, and then they walk into combat and hit you first. Beyond that, this is the one that allows them to use Yvraine and the Drukhari datasheets. They've got a sticky objective stratagem, a -1 to wound, a reroll all hits in melee if your squad's taken a casualty at some point, quite a big and scary shoot at the end of the shooting phase if the squad lost a model, so it doesn't make sense to do chip damage without finishing off a unit, lethal hits and ignores cover when shooting, and a 2 command points fights on death. For the first of the 2 lists here, this one was a one that won a big RTT, run by a player called Zika who went 3-0 in a 32-player event. This one's got Yvraine and the Visarch. I guess they'd probably go together in one of those big squads of Ynnead Incubi, maybe the ones in the Raider. Yvraine gives you reroll wounds in melee and just makes them spectacularly dangerous all-round threats, and the Visarch gives them fights first and chips in his own damage as well. And between all that and the Aeldari battle focus things, it's likely that they're going to get the jump on the enemy rather than the other way around, and really mess something up when they do so. Otherwise, there's an Archon with Borrowed Vigor. I guess he would go with the other unit of the Incubi. He'd be good for some free stratagems, and there are a few good ones on offer there, plus a regular Autarch. I'm a little bit less certain out of which of the various different nice aspect warriors he could join. Otherwise in the list, there's 2 units of 11 Storm Guardians for some sticky objectives and taking all the upgrades. 2 units of Fire Dragons, one taking the Fire Pike, though a couple taking Dragon Axe and Fusion Pistol, which is pretty interesting. I wonder if the melee was a bit more tempting in this Ynnead detachment. There's 3 sets of Howling Banshees, again strong melee troops and taking Executioners here. 2 sets of Striking Scorpions with Chain Sabers, 2 units of Warp Spiders with Spinneret Rifle and Death Weavers, and a big unit of Windriders. Lots of pretty scary options there to make good use of those really big game-changing stratagems and detachment rules. Yvraine's certainly one of the strongest and scariest datasheets that the Ynnead can field as well. Her Storm of Whispers is a surprisingly brutal psychic shooting attack against infantry, handing out a bunch of mortal wounds to anything that she can hit with that. Then in melee she chips in with a bunch of Strength 4, AP 3 and Damage 2 attacks with her Sword of Sorrows that become a lot more general purpose when she is re-rolling wound rolls for her lead unit, which is really brutal with Incubi. If her squad gets damaged but not destroyed, then with the Word of the Phoenix, then you can activate D3+1 Slain Bodyguard units to Rise from Death, and if she ever gets the chance to trigger that, then that's a huge amount of points restored to the board in one fell swoop. I certainly see her as the first choice to lead every Ynnead list over the Incarn. Finally, for another and really quite different take on Ynnead, there was this list by David Bannister that looked like it placed him joint second at the Brighton GT. This one may be looking a bit more experimental and just trying to take something of everything to try out the new Ynnead, though it's not like Eldar don't have a whole bunch of really good options, and it certainly seems to have been very effective. Again, there's Yvraine here looking like she's leading a unit of 5 Incubi in this one, an Archon leading the second set, and it seems that they'll be transported in a couple of Venoms. Otherwise, we've got some Wraith units which seem to be conspicuously absent from the rest of the armies, one Wraith Lord with a couple of Bright Lancers, and one unit of Wraith Guard with D-size, which can have some pretty frightening overwatch here, and there's a Spirit Seer to accompany them up the board and do a bit of healing. Otherwise, we've got some Fire Dragons with a Fire Pike, Howling Banshees with an Executioner, 3 Shining Spears, a set of Striking Scorpions, taking a Scorpion's Claw. Nice to see a Harlequin's troop on the table here with 5 players taking the Harlequin Blades. They seem like the better choice after the devastating wounds change happened, and they'll be riding in a Star Weaver alongside a Troop Master. There's a Lone Warlock Skyrunner with a Singing Spear, 5 Warp Spiders with a Power Blade array, an Autarch that I guess will be leading one of the many flavours of Aspect Warrior there. Feels like he could fairly viably join a couple of the different types, and then a bit of big scary firepower with inbuilt rerolls in a pair of Fire Prisms, still enormous hitting anti-tank pieces. Certainly looks like a fun army list, really nice to take a whole variety of different things and have loads of options for all that battle focus, strength from death and stratagems. In any case, certainly looks like the Space Elves have been having a pretty good time on their first tournament weekend. Let me know your thoughts on the army list down in the comments below, or any other insights that you might know about them. I'm sure I've missed a good amount of things, particularly with a Codex with quite so many options. As mentioned, feel free to check out the Magnet Baron. He'll be linked down in the video description if you want some neodymium things. They've got a huge amount of different goodies for 40k collectors, including a magnetizing starter kit with a bunch of drill bits and magnets and superglue. Basically any size of magnet that you could want for your hobby projects, and all their specific kits aimed at different 40k sets, which can be nice to know that you've got the right size magnets for the right models all in one place if you're kind of new to it. They'll be linked in the video description below, so thanks for sponsoring this one. If you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel, then check out the Patreon page or the affiliate discount links in the video description. A massive thank you to anyone supporting via those, though otherwise just an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.